Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the HUAWEI Pura 70 in the base edition. Let's get started. I also have available the review of the HUAWEI Pura 70 Pro and HUAWEI Pura 70 Ultra. Remember that there are 3 models in this series, so this is the most economical of the entire series, but it can already be considered high-end. Although in some cases, its price comes to compete even with the premium mid-range, that's why it becomes so attractive. Although that specifically in some promotions or special discounts. But its launch price has been $19,999, that is approximately $1,085, just so you have an idea of reference, but remember that prices here are not the same as there. Always consider that prices in Mexico include taxes and are usually a little higher. However, HUAWEI applies a discount on many occasions, so its price at the time of recording this video is 14,999 pesos, or about $815. And they also include the HUAWEI Nova G91. It's a device with a 7,000 mAh mega battery. I already have the full review available, but clearly the battery will be its strongest point. So considering the combo, it may prove to be a very attractive option to purchase. In addition, they include HUAWEI Care to protect you for accidental damage to the screen for 3 months. Obviously, being HUAWEI, it is going to have online distribution or also in physical stores. So it is not so complicated to go to a store to find it. Join me to know point by point what it can offer us. On the front, we will find a quite attractive design, especially for the bezels that are ultra thin. And furthermore, we could say that they are practically symmetrical. In addition, this device offers us a flat screen. So for those who do not like the curved screen, this could be an attractive proposal. In this case, we will find first generation Kunlun glass protection, unlike its older siblings that integrates the latest HUAWEI protection, but it is still a very hard and resistant glass. I could throw it away right now and it would still survive, but I don't want to hurt it even a little bit, so it has a very nice front end in design and very tough as well. On the right side, we find the power button with an orange highlight, plus the volume buttons. And as you notice, the frame is completely reflective metal, somewhat reminiscent of the iPhone. Although note that it can also get very stained, so you have to be cleaning it constantly if you want to maintain a very neat aesthetic. At the top, a microphone will be placed and the left side is completely clean. And taking advantage of this profile view, you should know that it has a thickness of 7.95 millimeters, so it is considerably thin and also weighs 207 grams, which for a high-end device I think is fine. And at the bottom we will find the tray to place the nano SIM card. In this case you can place 2 cards, although remember that this may vary depending on the distributor. We also find a microphone, the USB-C port, and finally the main speaker. HUAWEI has opted for a much more minimalist back cover design than in past generations. In this case, I have the Winter White edition, which looks very nice. It has a satin design that just reflects a bit of light, but does not reflect the image, giving a very sleek look. The triangular-shaped camera module with rounded corners does have a lot more reflections and definitely overall gives a very nice design touch. This edition will also be available in magenta color, which is for the more daring because it is a very intense design. The color really catches the eye in this edition and it also has the super reflective frame. So for those who want a design of this style, there are definitely few devices on the market that have such an intense and bold color. It is also available in a black edition, and with respect to resistance, it does have the IP level of water resistance. So if it ever gets submerged, it is going to have a high chance of surviving. Remember that this level of resistance is achieved in pure water. So if you are going to submerge it in pool water or salt water, do it for short periods of time at a shallow depth, and after that rinse it well to ensure that the device maintains that resistance. In any case, remember that this resistance degrades over time, as happens with all mobile devices. The screen is spectacular. It has a size of 6.6 inches, so it is a device that could enter as something more compact than the rest of the members of the family. It also has a very high resolution of 2760 by 1256 pixels. It is a resolution that is not so easy to categorize under a name, but it reaches a density of 459 pixels per inch. So it gives us extremely detailed and very sharp images. In addition, it also offers us OLED technology, so you will notice that it is a screen that has very good viewing angles, maintains very saturated colors, and also intense contrasts. Definitely, it is a screen according to what one would expect from a high-end device, so it does not disappoint in absolutely nothing. In fact, it also offers us a variable refresh rate with LTPO technology from 1 to 120 Hz. So in static content, it will save battery life, and in dynamic content, it's going to give you a very smooth motion experience. It's a display that supports HDR content, and its maximum peak brightness is 2500 nits. So it's a display really with very good capabilities, and the minimum brightness is also very comfortable for an indoor or nighttime use. And speaking of comfort, it has a dimming rate of 1440 Hz, so it's not a screen that gets to fatigue you. In addition, it includes dark mode and also a visual rest mode along with a flicker reduction option, as I say, to help the screen not fatigue you so easily. It also includes 2 styles of color calibration in case you want a more saturated color setting, although from the normal setting it's a display that covers all of the sRGB IP3 standard for an excellent viewing experience. You could also customize the screen, and the resolution will be adapting intelligently to consume less battery, as well as the refresh rate that I showed you a moment ago. So in short, it's an excellent display. As for the sound, we will also have a high-end experience. The main speaker is at the bottom, but it also has another speaker along with the earpiece for calls, so it does project stereo sound very nicely. It has good presence of bass frequencies. The volume is not exaggeratedly loud, just enough to have a good experience while listening to music or sharing it with friends. Let's listen to a small test, although remember that it is not the same as listening to it live. As usual, Huawei offering us a very good experience at the hardware level in sound. But in software, remember that Huawei still does not have something so advanced. The special sound effects settings are blocked if you do not have headphones connected, so you need to use one of these accessories so you can have a more advanced sound experience with different surround sound presets, and in the standard setting you can access a 10-band equalizer with a bass amplifier included. So with headphones the experience is customizable, but without headphones you can't move any parameter. It also has a function called Sound Booster, which will send the sound from the microphone of this device to a Bluetooth device, so you can use it as a wireless microphone with headphones or with speakers. And speaking of headphones, in this case they support various wireless sound codecs, so in this sense it does deliver a good experience, offering us, in addition to the basic ones, the LDAC codec, also LDOS HC, which is a Huawei codec, and also LC3LL. So yes, you can use high-resolution headphones in wireless format in conjunction with this device. And unlike its bigger brothers, in this case we will only find 2 microphones, one on the bottom and one on the top. In this case there is no microphone placed around the cameras as we saw on its siblings. Let's listen to a test.
Esta es una grabación realizada con los micrófonos integrados del HUAWEI Pura 70.
It definitely has good quality to pick up voices as one would expect from a high-end device. Below you will see a video recorded with this device, setting the sound system in my living room at maximum volume to see how it behaves in those environments.
I'd run 1,000 miles if I could run with you. And from what I have heard, you do the same thing too. I wanna stay forever. We could be good together. Guess mystery.
As you could notice, it doesn't generate really noticeable distortions or anything like that, so even if you want to use it to record in concerts or very noisy places, it will have a good quality. Just like the whole series, it has been included a wide novo of cameras with an aperture f2.4, and in this case it has fixed focus unlike its older siblings. You have a push shortcut by pressing twice the volume down button on the locked screen. Obviously it is a shortcut that you can only use when we have the locked screen, if it is unlocked without having how to enter the camera. The Yes experience will be considerably streamlined, although remember that Huawei gives priority to portrait mode. Even if you're in normal photo mode and rotate to the front camera, it switches directly to portrait. So always check whether or not you have the blur option enabled or not, because some weird pictures might come out if this option is always enabled. Remember also that it offers us 3 levels of amplitude, so basically it is equivalent to a few millimeters. In the beauty options, you also have different parameters to modify the skin, specifically 3 options. And at the top, it also offers us a button to access the color filters. In this case, it is not going to offer us a burst. And in the settings, you can activate the sound capture by mentioning a keyword or speaking at a high volume level. Or you also have smile detection for intelligent capture. Or remember that the floating shutter option is also available so that you can place it in the area you want to take pictures in a more comfortable way. This is going to be very useful because note that it doesn't have the hand gesture detection option, so you can't take pictures as comfortably with this camera. This front camera is going to offer us a very good level of detail. There's no doubt about that. It's very good photography with very good color management as well. Even in this scenario where there are shadows cast on the face, it's still an excellent result. Plus, you know, Huawei usually puts very wide cameras, so if you stretch your arm out, you could have a perfect framing with some scenery behind you without any problem. This width allows you to take a group photo with even 3 other friends practically at the same distance, and everyone will come out well focused. Although in this same photograph you realize one of its weaknesses as a result of being such a wide camera, and that is that it has less light entry. So in this photograph, which is indoors, you can see how the level of detail and even the color accuracy starts to reduce a bit. Although unlike its big brothers, in this case the front camera has fixed focus, so if you are very close you could be out of focus. But I insist, outdoor photography is exaggeratedly good, but obviously due to the large amount of light. However, if you take a picture indoors, you will notice what I was telling you a moment ago. The level of detail may remain more or less high, but there are many areas of the picture that will have a very inaccurate color and even appear a little more grainy. So, the camera does need a lot of light to have a lot of quality. And in backlit scenes, although the image does not look well optimized in the preview, after taking the picture and processing, you can see that it does achieve a good balance of lights and shadows. The shadows are well lit and the highlights are slightly overexposed, but in general I think it is a good quality photograph. And at night it again confirms that it is a camera that needs a lot of light to have good quality. If you are in front of some light source, I think the result will be good, but notice how in the darker areas and especially on the edges, there is a yellow pigmentation that is not very nice to see. It's not necessarily a yellow pigmentation, but in this case as a consequence of the warm light it looked that way, but in other scenarios it might look like a little pink or purple and with some blurring on the edges. So it's not such a quality camera when there's not a lot of light. In fact, notice that some textures disappear due to noise handling that might be excessive in these areas. And in night backlighting, which is a very complicated scenario, the result is good in light balance, but the color is going to be very unbalanced because the screen is very cold, and lighting your face is going to be quite out of tune with the warm light in case you are taking pictures in such a scenario. If you turn off the flash though, you're probably going to get a slightly more color balanced result. And night portraits aren't as high quality with this front-facing camera either. Notice that even though it tries its best, there is still quite a bit of noise or rather graininess in the face, and you notice a lot of difference from the out-of-focus area, which is completely clean. In addition, the detection may fail, so it is not so advisable to take night portraits. However, note that in the daytime the portrait will improve, especially in definition obviously. And in this case, it more or less tries to keep the subjects in focus, although it doesn't do it with 100% accuracy. But at least they're not as out of focus as the background, so the photo result might look slightly more natural, though still not at the level of a high-end device. Notice how between the 3 there is still an area that is not as out of focus, so it is less accurate than we would like in a device at this price point. The rear photographic system is composed of the 13mm camera. It is the ultra-wide camera, which has a 13-megapixel sensor, f2.2 aperture and autofocus. So it can also work for macro shots, let's say they are 2 cameras in one. We will also find the camera considered as the main camera, with 27mm of focal length, 50 megapixels in its sensor, and in this case it has variable aperture, from f1.4 to f4.0, which is a parameter that few smartphones currently have. The variable aperture will be controlled automatically, but within the professional mode, you can also control it manually. And notice how you notice in this case that the diaphragm closes or opens to let in more or less light. So it's a very useful parameter for professional photographers. In a moment, I'll also show you what the results look like with different aperture styles, but it's definitely something that few smartphones offer these days. In addition, it will be a camera that will also offer optical stabilization, and since it has a high-resolution sensor, Huawei offers 2x capture with optical quality. That is, this camera is also leveraged as if it were a 54mm telephoto camera. And if you have an image enhancement option enabled, it gives you 25 megapixel pictures, so it's very attractive. And for zoom specifically, it has a 135mm camera, so 5x optical zoom. Which, while it has more optical zoom than its siblings, the sensor is lower resolution, so with 12 megapixels you don't get as high a hybrid zoom. In addition, the aperture is a little more closed than its brothers, in this case with f3.4, so for the nights it will not be so useful. And finally, it does have optical stabilization and it also has autofocus. Remember that if you want 25 megapixel photos, you must have the image enhancement option activated, which is highly recommended because you will notice the improvement. Like all mobile devices, this one integrates a small delay through the camera viewfinder. However, it is possible to capture the exact moment by pressing the shutter quickly. If you press and hold, you can start a burst of up to 100 photos, although it takes quite a while to start. In fact, it takes more than a second to start, so the burst is not so useful for this kind of snappy shots. You can tap on the screen to adjust the exposure and also the focus. And remember that it has a button to customize the Xmash color representation that the photo will have, just like its big brothers. Within the professional mode, we can move more parameters like the metering type, the ISO, which can go up to 409,600, also the exposure speed, which can go up to 30 seconds, and as I showed you a moment ago, also the aperture if you're setting the main camera. You also have the compensation parameter, focus, and white balance. And obviously the device will allow us to capture raw photos to have something more advanced. In this case, it does not integrate a QR code reader from the main camera interface, but it does have a direct access button to AI Lens, which is the other tool we need to open to be able to perform this action. And with respect to documents, note that in this case, we simply need to enter a specific mode to be able to do document scanning. In this case, it will automatically detect the edges and do the cropping. Although it is a simple scanner compared to other implementations we have seen in other devices, since it does not allow us to apply any filter on the image to optimize the level of detail, it only lets us reposition the edges. And although it is in image format, if we want a PDF, we can select the print option, and in this case, the option to save it in that format will appear. If you choose to take the picture in the high resolution mode, note that the level of detail will be very high and very good. High enough to make a crop and extract a photograph from there, while maintaining a good resolution. Obviously, the ultra-wide camera is not as high resolution as we saw in the previous video. The ultra-wide camera can actually generate some very significant distortions on the sides. So, it is an ultra-wide camera that we would consider simple. It is not as advanced as one might expect from a high-end device. By the way, this device also has a higher resolution mode in photography that will allow you to take pictures of 25 megapixels. This with the main camera. And it is definitely something that is very much appreciated because the level of detail will be completely superior to the vast majority of devices in the same range. In this sense, we do see extraordinary quality. Even applying Zoom 2x, where the device is able to maintain optical quality, we will also have a 25 megapixel photograph. So the result is too good, and note that it also has excellent color management. In this case, it has a lens of 135mm, that is zoom 5x approximately, to have a supreme quality in this type of scenes. Although you do need a lot of light because the aperture is a bit closed. This would be the result with 10x zoom, where we still see excellent quality thanks to the hybrid zoom. Look for example at the fence in the background, as it manages to maintain a very good detail. And the maximum zoom supported is 50x, which in this type of scene where there are letters is very well optimized to raise the level of detail. In motion scenes, the ultra-wide camera behaves very well. In fact, the same will happen with the main camera. Despite not having the same technology as the Ultra model, I think that in movements that are not ultra fast, the result will be good. Even with the zoom camera, we have an adequate result. In this case, the movement is a little more noticeable, but in reality, it is still a very good quality. Remember that in these tests, the green ring was rotating. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera can suffer a little more than usual due to the low light input. The main camera seems to me to have a very good performance, maintaining good contrast, good level of detail, and everything correct. Even if you apply zoom 2x, we still have an excellent quality. And with zoom 5x, surprisingly, even in this scenario where there is not too much illumination, we still see a very good result, and the level of detail is extraordinary. And remember that this camera also integrates X-Mesh technologies, so you can select a different color rendition if you prefer it that way. Some give you more contrast, others more illumination, and there is also a black and white model. In backlight scenarios, it is important to note something, because if the device is a little hot, note that the results will not be favorable with any of the cameras. In all cases, a completely burned out photograph came out. But if the device is in optimal condition, notice that the result is very good, even though the preview does not look so optimized. But definitely after processing, it makes a good balance of highlights and shadows, keeping good color and obviously good detail. Believe me, in this case, it was an exaggeratedly aggressive backlight and the result is very good. Notice that the preview reveals a bit of how complicated this scene was. Even with the zoom camera, even though the preview may have completely burned out the background, notice that in this case the cloud textures are revealed. Although a bit of chromatic aberration is also revealed in these areas, which may become normal for such a device and such a small camera. But definitely the backlit result is very good with all three cameras. And at night we will also have a good performance. In this case, it is the ultra-wide camera with the automatic mode, and curiously, if you use the night mode, the result worsens. In this case, although obviously I think this will be corrected with a future update, something very similar will happen with the main camera, where we will find a very good level of detail, good noise management and good color saturation, as well as good management in the exposure of the most illuminated areas. But if you use the night mode, the result remains very similar, although the most illuminated areas seem to overexpose a little more. With the 2x zoom setting, you do notice a difference between auto mode and night mode. It seems to me that in night mode, we gain much more color accuracy in the warm tonality that was in that day. And with the 5x setting, the quality of the level of detail is exaggeratedly high, although it definitely in this case doesn't seem to have as much ability to balance highlights and shadows well. And if you use the night mode, it brings back the warm tonality that was there at the time. So yes, it is recommended to use night mode, especially if you notice that the colors are not coming out as true to reality. But note that in these scenarios where there is no light source present, the color becomes very distorted with the ultra-wide camera. In fact, with night mode, it looks even worse. I have no doubt that this will be corrected with an update. The main camera behaves much better in this type of scenarios, and with the night mode also improves its level of detail. And also with the 2x setting, we see a good quality in the automatic mode, and with the night mode improves the saturation of the colors, although the level of detail drops a little because it is a long exposure, and in this case they were moving objects. And if you try to take a zoom picture in this kind of very dark scenario, it's going to use 100% digital zoom even though you have optical zoom available, because the aperture is very closed and you're practically going to get a dark scene. So using the night mode, you're going to increase the color saturation a little bit, but it's not possible to take good quality night zoom pictures. For macro photography, there is something that could be improved, because in this case, the device, despite having variable aperture, where it could greatly improve the uniform focus of these small objects, curiously in the automatic mode uses an aperture f2.0 that is not so closed and therefore will produce an effect of spots in the contours. Note that there are very specific areas that are focused, but other areas that will appear quite out of focus and stained. Then the result is not so optimal in automatic mode. This is another example. Note that the photograph is with a very open aperture, and therefore there are some areas that come out in focus and other areas of the same object that will appear more out of focus. So the ideal is to use the manual mode and close the aperture as much as possible to have a more uniform focus. Note that in this case we gain more definition, although this, from my point of view, should be applied from the automatic mode. Although it is recommended to use the f4 aperture 0 point only when you have a lot of light. But remember that this device can also use the ultra-wide camera as a macro camera, so if you keep zooming in, it will automatically switch camera, and in this case the result will be with a very good level of detail. So it doesn't disappoint in macro photography. although it's not at the level of its bigger brothers that have a zoom lens also with macro capabilities. But if you zoom 2x's, you can still manage to maintain a good quality in your macro photography. In the case of panoramic photography, we see a bit paler color, so it seems to me that could be improved. Also, it doesn't look high definition. So it's a simple panoramic photograph. And finally, portraits have always been a Huawei specialty, and this one is no exception. The result is very good, although I think it is a slight step below its big brothers. But honestly, this being one of the cheapest devices in the high-end, it can become an excellent tool and very attractive for those who like this type of portrait photography. Notice how even in this case, the log that was slightly behind me comes out slightly out of focus, not as out of focus as what is further away, so it has very good out of focus accuracy. It also allows you to take portraits with 2-axis zoom, while maintaining optical quality, so the result will also be very nice in this sense, with a good blur, and it is also able to keep the objects in the foreground in focus. Although the bad news is that this device doesn't allow for 5x zoom portrait photography as you might find on the iPhone or the Galaxy S24 Ultra, which in both cases we find 5x zoom lenses as in this case. But here the only thing it allows you to do is to take portraits with 3-axis zoom, where you start to notice that we're talking about digital zoom. So, although the quality of the blur is very nice and we have a good result, I actually think it could be better if it allowed us to take portrait pictures with the 5-axis setting. Although curiously, in this case, the motion portrait test went very well, unlike its older siblings where we saw that they failed. In this case, the detection was more accurate. Interestingly enough. So I think it's a good device. Definitely the pictures that this device will allow you to take will be of very good quality. If you use the virtual aperture mode, you are going to notice this kind of very nice results. Although not with 100% accuracy, as you notice that there are some areas where it doesn't have as much detail. And above all, if you zoom in, you'll notice that it's not as detailed a photograph as the automatic mode photographs, but if you don't zoom in, the result can look very attractive. For video recording, you should note that it supports recording at 4 to 60 frames per second with all cameras except the ultra-wide camera. Remember I mentioned that this camera has a lower level compared to its big brothers. So the optimum will be to record at 4 to 30 frames per second, because that resolution is supported by all lenses, including the front camera as well. When recording video, note that you have a quick access with shortcuts to modify the zoom, or you can also have a ring sliding on this part. So it is quite easy to control this parameter. There is also a button to take pictures, another button to pause the video, but no button to rotate the front camera. Interestingly, and I highlight this because other mid-range Huawei devices or even in previous generations, there was a button to rotate the front camera without the need to stop video recording. What does remain is the button to turn on the flashlight without cutting the recording. And likewise, you can tap to adjust the focus and exposure, but also within the professional mode, you can switch to the video option, and even while you are recording, you can move all these parameters manually so that, for example, you can control the focus, which could be a very interesting parameter when recording video. The video quality with the ultra-wide camera doesn't look the most attractive to me. I think it is a simple video. In this sense, you can tell that it's not a top-of-the-line device in the whole Huawei range, but a sort of entry-level high-end. Switching to the main camera, definitely that the video improves tremendously in definition. Fortunately, the color remains very similar, but you do notice a much better level of detail and much better quality in the lens when you use this main camera. And with respect to the zoom camera, you notice that it also maintains a good definition, a good level of detail, and good color. So I think the worst camera for recording is the ultra-wide camera because of the low definition. But both the main camera and the zoom camera have a very good quality. In interiors, this is confirmed. The ultra-wide camera looks poorly defined and doesn't really look like a high-quality camera. In fact, it looks like a mid-range camera in this regard. Switching to the main camera, you will immediately notice more detail, and definitely, even in this kind of indoor conditions, we have good color management and also good noise management, although a bit less contrast than we would like. But I think overall, the result is positive. And if you zoom in 5x, you're going to have good detail, although it can struggle a little bit more with noise. So if there's a lot of movement, it's going to immediately reveal that noise. In backlit scenarios, notice how the ultra-wide camera has a bit of an odd quality. It looks like the foreground is a little out of focus, although it does have a considerably good balance of highlights and shadows. But notice when we switch to the main camera how the result improves completely in terms of color. Also, the backlight handling is very good on this device, although some areas can still look slightly overexposed when detecting the face. And with the case of the 5x zoom camera, we are also going to have a good result, although the focus could also get a bit lost in this kind of backlit scenarios, but I find the result to be pleasing. However, at night is where you're going to notice the most how bad the ultra-wide camera is for video recording. There really is a lot of noise present, little detail, and it's definitely not the quality of a high-end video recording device. It is an extremely simple camera for this type of task. If you switch to the main camera, you will immediately notice the increase in quality, although in darker areas it still doesn't have as many capabilities to define the level of detail well. But in areas where there is more illumination, I think the result will be pleasant, especially because it manages to balance the more illuminated areas well and handles noise sufficiently well. Obviously, the zoom camera is going to suffer much more in darker areas. This zoom camera is advisable to use it only in the most illuminated areas because otherwise the device is going to suffer a lot. It is going to look like a pastel effect with very little detail. In fact, if you try to start recording in this dark area with this lens, it will not use it. It will use only digital zoom. But as in my case, I started the recording in a very well lit area, so I was able to keep this lens in these dark areas, but it is not recommended. By the way, the zoom is going to be smoothly noticeable, although the closer you get to the 5x setting, you notice a tremendous amount of noise. So it's immediately noticeable when you make the switch to the 5x lens. I think this could be improved to be a little more optimized. The maximum zoom in video recording is 15x and it doesn't have as much stabilization as we would like, but the result is good in color. Just what I say is that they should improve the intermediate zoom between 1 and 5x because it does have a poor quality. And with regard to stabilization, the ultra-wide camera can possibly better disguise the aggressive movements when walking and even when running. Although having autofocus, some action scenes could be a little out of focus at times. The main camera may also struggle a bit more in this sense of stabilization, so it doesn't seem to be an expert in these kinds of scenarios. And obviously with the 5x zoom, it will be much more complicated to stabilize. That's a normal thing, but remember that we've seen the iPhone do some very interesting things with action mode and this zoom camera. In this case, Huawei doesn't have it available. Huawei also has a recording mode available with a portrait effect, i.e. blurring the background, although it does so in full HD at 24 frames per second, so it does not have 4K available and has poor detection accuracy. Notice how the hands don't come out in focus. Fortunately, it keeps the effect applied even if it stops detecting the face, but it's actually a very simple effect. It does not change the intensity of the blur depending on the distance. And in this case, fortunately, it does manage to keep foreground objects in focus, something that is definitely very positive, but still needs improvement in accuracy. The fast camera is extremely simple, even though it's in 4K. In fact, if you pause the video at any time, you'll notice very little definition due to the low bit per second rate it has. So it's a pretty simple video. Fortunately, it has a bit of stabilization, but definitely for a high-end device, this video comes off as very low quality. Although fortunately you can control the speed manually, but the fast motion is the most basic, so the movements of people can be too fast. But you can go up to 1800x, where you know you can record even plants growing. So it can be very attractive fast motion, especially if you're completely static. Slow motion can be in full HD at 240 frames per second. So it's going to be good quality for scenes that you want to record with this device. Of course, it's also available in 120 frames per second, and it also has a super slow motion mode which goes to 960 frames per second. In fact, you can create an automatic recording setting because it's a bit tricky to capture the exact moment. Although it's only a fraction of a second, but it's attractive because few current high-end devices allow it. I find that the recording quality of this device is good, especially with the main camera and the zoom camera. Although I think it is still not up to the level of what one would expect from a top-of-the-range device. I think the photography is very well worked by Huawei, but the video still needs improvement. Fortunately, the focus handles it well even in these types of scenarios where there is a bit of backlighting, which can be very tricky for several devices. Focus, I think, remains stable. Although with the zoom camera, it's obviously going to be much harder to focus on small things. Remember that this device doesn't have the same macro focusing capabilities that its larger siblings have for taking these types of small objects. In this case, it struggles a lot, especially if you are backlit. The front camera also records in 4K, and that is excellent news. Remember that being such a wide camera, it can have good stabilization, and despite cropping, you still get good framing without the need to stretch your arm too far. In fact, it gives you 3 types of framing in the settings, so you choose whether you want to have a very wide scene or a slightly closer scene, and you can maintain this same level of detail. In that sense, the experience is extremely good, although remember that ideally you want to be in a very well lit environment. And if you're backlit, it won't be able to balance highlights and shadows well. It will burn quite a bit of the background, so it is advisable to record only with the light from the front and not from behind. Also remember that it has fixed focus, so you won't be able to zoom in on an object to focus on the audience. Indoors, again, you will notice that the front camera drops a lot of level, and in the video it is more noticeable. While in photography it was still possible to recover a good result, in this case the noise level can become much more noticeable, and therefore it is not recommended to record in this type of scenarios. The camera will suffer a lot. Therefore, at night it can suffer even more than usual. There are practically no textures. In fact, curiously also in one of the corners there was a red box. I believe that this device is still going to receive some updates to improve this type of scenarios. And obviously in the darker areas still, the device will light up its screen to try to give you more illumination on the face, but it's not enough. Definitely that this camera sacrifices a lot of light input in exchange for spaciousness. So if you want to record a lot in low light environments, it is not recommended. With the front camera, we will also find the fast camera mode, but exactly the same as it happened on the back. It goes to a bit rate too low, so it has little level of detail. Although fortunately it does let you regulate the speed, but the lowest is 15x, which can be too fast. Interestingly, the device also integrates front-facing slow motion, which is not something you use too much, but many high-end devices offer it. So it is also necessary for this device to have it. In fact, this is one of the few I've seen that with the front camera lets us go up to 240 frames per second, so you could have some interesting scenes as well. However, it doesn't let you take a portrait video with the front camera, but you do have the dual recording mode to show both the rear camera and the front camera in the same scene. The result is attractive. The resolution is in full HD, a bit wider. And fortunately, it does allow us to switch between different zoom settings, although it doesn't specifically use the 5x zoom camera, but at least it does let us have this versatility when recording using this setting. Interestingly, it's also going to allow us to use 2 rear cameras in case we want to have a wide scene and a slightly closer scene. And it will also have picture-in-picture mode, where we will be able to move the frame, although with a stop on the right, although we cannot resize it. But fortunately, it does maintain the zoom and autofocus capabilities. So the dual camera, I think it behaves well, although it is not the best at present. In software, we will find the MUI system in its 14.2.0 version. Remember that in this version, it is much easier and simpler to install Google applications for the most part. So many limitations are removed. As you can see, YouTube is running completely native, just like Gmail or Google News. Basically, all Google apps can work without major inconvenience, with the exception of Google Pay or Google Wallet. And possibly there are still some inconveniences, but they are really minimal. In the description, I leave you the link where you can see how to install Google applications quite simple, and I show you how each of them works. But that would be one of the main attractions of this software version. But even though Huawei is going to release several updates for this device, the bad news is that we don't have a clear policy to know how many updates it will receive. Although I insist, being one of their high-end devices, it is going to receive a good number of updates without a doubt. The system has some features like these widgets hidden inside some icons on the screen. In the theme options, we will also now find interactive themes that in conjunction with the lock screen can show some very nice transitions. In fact, they also integrate some transitions in conjunction with the always-on skin. So customization can also become an attractive theme. There are some where you can select the emojis that you want to have available. So you have a very good level of customization. In addition, they also have other magazine options where you can select your own pictures and it will intelligently detect the edges to do the cropping. So I insist that the lock screen has improved tremendously to offer more customization in this system. Obviously, it also has the always on display feature, where you can select some specific covers. It can be in full screen only if it is in conjunction with one of the selected themes. Otherwise, it is going to be in a small circle. It also has some artificial intelligence tools like Celia, which is its own voice assistant, although it's not that smart yet. So the best thing to do is to use it only to control some parameters of your device, like turning on the flashlight or setting a timer or alarms. But don't consult a lot of information because it will only send you to the internet. The one-handed use mode does adjust on both the vertical and horizontal axis, so it can be comfortable. And it also has the traditional knuckle gestures for taking screenshots, screen recordings, or even snippets specifically. So it can be useful as well. It can also keep the screen on while you're viewing it. And note that it also has advanced gestures for using the device without touching it. This can be useful if you have food stains on your hands or something. Notice how you can take a screenshot simply by making a fist. And note how you could even navigate from TikTok as well by doing these kinds of simple gestures. Interestingly, it also includes an option to scan QR codes very quickly. On the main screen, we simply have to give 2 taps on the back of the cell phone. Although curiously, the first time you try to do this action, you will be asked to activate the necessary permissions. But that can become quite complex for many people because it doesn't tell you specifically which area you need to enter. So it's at the bottom and then you activate and then go back. From my point of view, this should already come configured. But after doing this action, you can finally scan the QR codes with a good speed. Remember that there is also the app dock from which you can launch them in a floating mode, although you cannot open more than one app in this mode simultaneously, otherwise they will be replaced. So it is not so advanced, and you can also minimize them in this kind of sidebar. It has an application to measure with augmented reality, but honestly it does not have such an accurate operation. And within the gallery, it has an option to edit by deleting objects, but notice how its performance will not be so optimal since it will not use generative artificial intelligence, but it will simply fill with the patterns that are around. So it's not such an advanced result. You could also compare 2 or 3 images if you took a picture and can't decide which one you want to keep. This tool is pretty cool, and remember that you could also create a collage or a video in a simple way. In fact, another outstanding option is the Petal Clip application, through which you can have a very complete video editor with many options without any watermark or having to pay any subscription. Overall, the system, as I have already said on several occasions, seems to be on the right track, but there are still several options that could be added. Lastly, in this case, remember that it does have an X-axis optical engine, although it is not as well exploited in the system. So there are several actions that will not offer you this feedback through the vibration motor. Even in this type of slider, where generally many systems take advantage of the haptic motor, you're not going to get any feedback, so Huawei needs to improve this as well. The fingerprint reader is inside the display, and we're talking about an optical reader and not ultrasonic. Maybe that could be improved considering it's a high-end device. So it doesn't have as fast recognition, but it is going to be effective. It allows you up to 5 different registers, and you can also change the animation of the recognition between 4 different options. In addition to that, you have facial recognition, but only in 2 dimensions, so it's not as secure. And it has a smart unlock feature so that while it is connected to a Bluetooth device, it stays unlocked. In additional options, it has a native Huawei password manager, but it does not have cloud synchronization, so it is able to automatically fill in passwords, but you must enter them as you use the phone. It would be better if it were synchronized between all Huawei devices. It also has day-to-day tools, such as the app lock, where you can select which apps will ask for your fingerprint again to let you log in. Also the safe, where you can securely store your files. And if you ever lose your phone, you can also find it on the map. The device also gives you suggestions to change some settings and have a more secure experience. And as for privacy, it has a dashboard where you see the permissions that certain applications are requesting. It also has a super privacy mode that will completely turn off the camera, microphone and location when enabled, but it doesn't have any private Wi-Fi browsing mode with VPN. You can use external VPNs, but it does not have a VPN of its own. It also has a private space mode where you can access another space with its own apps and its own files in case you want to have more or less 2 phones in one, although it doesn't have a child mode, which might be convenient. And within the optimizer, you can also scan for malware. In this case, they do this in collaboration with a company called Plus360, so you have this level of protection as well. As always, remember that Huawei also offers the digital balance options where you can analyze how much time you're using on your device and on which applications. In addition, you can set yourself some limits and times where it is not going to be possible for you to use your cell phone. In fact, from this section, you could also manage your children's devices if they are from Huawei as well. And Huawei also integrates emergency options to have contact information, and you can press the on-off button 5 times to initiate an emergency call. The battery is 4,900 mAh, and in this case it performed quite well, a little above what other devices with 5,000 mAh batteries perform, so I think it gave a good result. In my test running the drainer in the foreground, it gave 4 hours and 30 minutes, and in the background it went up to 7 hours and 48 minutes. But remember that starting with this version of the operating system, Huawei got a little bit stricter with the apps that are running in the background, so I was constantly closing them. So if you have any application that you want to be a priority and not be closed at any time, it is important that you turn off this option and choose that you want to manage everything manually to avoid losing some notifications. And also, in terms of charging, it also offers us a good power with 66 watts. We have to consider that when we connect the charger, it also gives us a turbocharging option. So using that turbocharging activated in 15 minutes, it got up to 43%, showing that it is a very good speed despite not being so impressive in its total power. In 30 minutes, it got up to 75%, and the full charge it finished in 44 minutes. So it's very fast. Remember, it also has wireless charging and reversible wireless charging like every high-end device. So when it's on promotion, the price becomes very attractive because it gives us all kinds of high-end features. It has a simple power-saving mode, but not a more intense mode for emergencies. And the good news is that it has a section where you can see the current status of your battery in terms of its maximum health, and it also has 2 protection mechanisms to take care of this battery health: smart charging or custom charge limit. So you can perfectly make your battery can get to last for more years. Connectivity undoubtedly is one of the weak points of this device, as it does not support 5G networks. So we have at most 4G level, which is still pretty good for a lot of users. But if you want to have it newer, it obviously won't be available here. Also, in this case, it doesn't seem to have eSIM available, although it's curious because there are times where the option does appear and times where it doesn't appear. So it could get a bit confusing. Fortunately, it does support Wi-Fi 6 networks, so although it does not have the fastest mobile networks, at least in Wi-Fi networks it can reach very good download speeds. It also has Bluetooth 5.2, which although it is not the latest, I think it still achieves a good level of stability, although it can be considered a bit outdated. And although it also has NFC, you're not really going to be able to take advantage of it much, since you can't use Google Pay. So you rely on some banking apps that allow you to make mobile payments, but you can take advantage of NFC to link to other devices. Obviously, it doesn't have FM radio, and in this case, it also doesn't integrate Huawei's near-link technology, which would be the evolution of Bluetooth. So it is not yet compatible with the latest accessories or future accessories that Huawei will be launching. It also has wireless screen projection. It can be in mirror format, or it can also be in desktop format. That is, it will show you a Windows interface and you can use your cell phone as a trackpad or as a keyboard. So you can also increase your productivity in that sense. It doesn't come with Android Auto out of the box, although you can install it. But since it doesn't come as a factory installation, it might have some inconsistencies. But in general, you can install it. The port is USB 3.1 Gen 1, offering a good speed, and in the sensors we did not find any relevant absence. It seems to have everything you need, including also a gyroscope and a proximity sensor that reacts perfectly well. It is not a virtual sensor, so all the operation of the sensors is correct. Huawei's ecosystem, as I always mention, is one of the most complete. Remember that it has a very good catalog of devices between Huawei FreeBuds, Huawei Watch, Huawei Band, Huawei MateBook, Huawei MatePad, and many others. And everything interacts seamlessly with each other. You can explore the videos I have available of each of these products to let you know the level of interaction they achieve, but it really is very good. So this could be one of their strengths, also including technologies like Super Device, Multicam, Huawei Share, Multiscreen Connect, and many others. Although in the management of home devices it may fall a little short, as it does not bring some application for that. You must install AI Live from Huawei, but few devices would still be compatible with this application. although it is expected that over time Huawei will launch more home devices. You could still get to install Google Home or some other app to control devices, but it is not native to Huawei. Where you do see that Huawei is a pretty powerful brand is in the storage options, as by logging in you can access various Huawei cloud plans. For free you get 5 gigabytes. So Huawei is expected to continue its development and keep growing, but at the moment it offers a good ecosystem. It's time to talk about performance. I'll tell you that this device has the Kirin 9000 S1 processor, a slightly modified edition of the Kirin 9000, which was already a considerably good processor, although remember that Huawei currently does not have the ability to access a modern manufacturing process. So it is trying to engineer things to come up with decent powerful processors. In this case, it took 2.6 seconds on average to open each application, confirming that it is not the fastest in the industry, but I think it can give us a high performance in opening applications, as you noticed, and especially when handling many open applications. Note, please, that it comes with 12 gigabytes of RAM, so it will be very difficult for any application to have a reboot. This is very useful for people who want to work with many applications at the same time, but note that at this moment one has just restarted. It almost always happens that when you are talking about something well, it crashes, but there it is. I think the rest of the applications are still running, showing good management of that RAM. So I insist, if you are one of those people who want to have a lot of things open without the device getting slow or without your noticing white screens or reboots, this would be a good option. It also offers 256 gigabytes of storage, so it does well as a high-end device in addition to the storage you can have in the cloud. And for the video export test, we're going to use PetalClip, which is the native editor for this device, to see what capabilities it could achieve. We'll export this video by stitching together several clips recorded in 4K with total duration of 1 minute, and that's it. It takes about 35 seconds, showing us that it's not at the same level of today's devices, but it's not too far away either. Finally, let's talk about games. Remember that in this case, Huawei, in a curious way within the applications, has the Apps Assistant from which you can manage the games you have installed, which will be able to run these additional tools. You can also add a shortcut to the home screen, and in this games area, we will be able to have this type of tools that are basic, but that is appreciated. We have a performance accelerator, also a do not disturb mode. You can avoid unwanted gestures and touches on the screen, and you can also block the automatic brightness so that when you play and cover the brightness sensor, this parameter of the screen does not move. You could also connect some accessories, although in this case there are not many available on the market. In Call of Duty, this device defaults to very high quality at a very high frame rate. In fact, we can also go up to an ultra rate, although the graphic quality will drop to the lowest level. So in this case, we will run the content at a maximum rate of frames per second at very high quality. And note that almost all the effects are also available simultaneously, and also the experimental functions. So it has good graphics support. And in the test, it gave us an excellent result, average of 60 frames per second, practically perfect stability. So it has a very good performance on the processor. Although interestingly enough, even though it didn't get that hot, overall the device feels slightly hotter because of the heat distribution that it has, but it doesn't seem to reduce its performance even when it does get to feel a little bit hot. We also played with the ultra rate setting and again had very good performance, at 89 frames per second on average. Although in this case it should be noted that the graphics, it sets them to the lowest possible quality, whereas other high-end devices out there support medium graphics quality using this frame rate per second. So it's a curious fact, but it actually has a good experience. In fact, another curiosity is that the device actually started at 60 frames per second, but after a few seconds it went up to 90 frames per second to stay with good stability there. And again, without ever getting that hot. In the Legends game, as usual, we changed the automatic setting to a setting according to the range of the device, so we selected Ultra Detail at 60 frames per second. And in this case, if it's a game that has a little bit more complications, it seems that the performance can be affected as well depending on the content you're running. It's not something disastrous, but definitely the more demanding gamers are going to notice that it has some significant drops. But if you're a more casual gamer, I think you're not going to have a problem with this. In fact, the device still maintains a high enough experience, although the lowest peak was 21 frames per second, which for the price range is definitely considered a significant drop in performance. It also got to warm up a bit on the high side. We also played PUBG, and in this case it is a game that is still not that demanding graphically speaking, so we turned it all the way up to the highest in Ultra HDR at ultra frame rate. In fact, on other settings the extreme rate also appears, and in this case the performance was perfect at 40 frames per second, practically 100% stability. So there is not much to say. In fact, the temperature confirms that this game is not that complex because it was below 40 degrees Celsius. So I don't have any complaints regarding this game. And finally, by default in Genshin Impact, this device gives the medium graphics quality, but we turned it up to very high, and we also turned the motion blur up to very high and went up to 60 frames per second. So it was a pretty complex test, but in this case you can tell it's a processor that falls short. In fact, it is curious that its older siblings incorporate a more modern processor, and therefore in their older siblings we saw better performance. But in this case, still the game will go with little fluidity. It does not freeze completely, but obviously the most demanding gamers will notice that the game decreases its performance at times, in addition to the heating rises significantly. Although it will also be very important to see at what price you get it, because if you get it at the price of a premium mid-range device, definitely that is going to be a very remarkable performance. But definitely at the launch price you will find many more powerful options than this one. Either way, remember that we wouldn't highly recommend this device for gaming due to some issues that some games might still present when trying to install them. So this has been all for the moment regarding this device. It's going to excel tremendously in photography, no doubt about it, and it gives you a high-end experience in other ways, such as having wireless charging and reversible wireless charging. Plus, an excellent display, excellent sound, and very nice design. However, still the official absence of Google services might weigh it down. Although, as I said, in this version it is much easier to deal with such details. For now, that's all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can let us know, and we'll see you next time.